There was a party going on aboard a ship, and captain gave a speech. And sitting at the head table was a 70-year-old man, seemingly embarrassed for being praised by the captain. Earlier that morning, a young woman had fallen overboard, and within seconds, this man was in the water, cold water, at her side. She was rescued, and the elderly gentleman was instantly a hero. When the time came for this brave passenger to speak, he stood up, and the whole room got quiet. He walked up to the microphone, and he said, "I just want to know one thing. Who pushed me?" Probably heard that before, but it's really cute story. What's that? Once was enough? Okay. All right. Anyway, we are looking in the book of Joshua today in the first chapter, and we're going to find out that Joshua did not need to be pushed, but he did need encouragement. Let's read the first, and the Lord knew what Joshua needed, and he saw to it that he received it. Verses 1 through 4 of chapter 1 of Joshua. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, who had served Moses. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now you and all the people prepare to cross over the Jordan to the land I am giving the Israelites. I have given you every place where the sole of your foot treads, just as I promised Moses. Your territory will be from the wilderness and Lebanon to the great Euphrates River, all the land of the Hittites, and west to the Mediterranean Sea." Moses had died, and God needed someone to lead the children of Israel, the Israelites. He needed someone capable, and someone who was not just militarily capable, but spiritually capable. And so he chose Joshua. Now Joshua had quite a bit of experience with the military, and he had been Moses' assistant. And 40 years before this, Joshua had been one of the 2 spies who voted. There were 12 altogether, but 2 spies voted to move and to go in to conquer the promised land. The other 10 overruled them, and that did not happen. So here they are, 40 years after traveling the desert. They are ready once again to enter the promised land. Now this was going to be a really huge task for Joshua, and he had big sandals to fill. You've heard of people having to fill someone's shoes, after they succeed them. I can think back to when Adolph Rupp retired and Joe Hall took over. And I'm sure he had a lot of thoughts about, how am I going to be received as a coach by the players and also the fans. And that's happening in another school that I don't like to mention the name of, but their coach retired last year. They're going to get a new one, so just wonder how that will happen for them. Anyway, it's difficult to fill the big shoes, such as Joshua following Moses. The Lord told Joshua to prepare the Israelites to cross the Jordan to the land that he was giving them. Now in verses 2 and 3, you see the word give. And that word actually is emphasizing that Joshua's work that he was going to do and the leadership he was going to provide was going to be God's work, God's leadership. And then the Lord gave Joshua the boundaries of the promised land, told him where they would need to go and what they were to do. Excuse me. Next, the Lord gave Joshua encouragement. Verse 5. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. I will be with you, just as I was with Moses. I will not leave you or forsake you. This is God speaking to Joshua. And not only would the Lord give them this land, He also promised that no one would be able to stop them from taking it. Now, we're going to see it just a little bit later that there is a condition that goes with this. But the Lord reminded Joshua how he had been with Moses, and he said, I will not leave you or forsake you. The secret of Moses' success was that God's presence was with him. And it would be the secret of Joshua's success also. And folks, it continues to be the secret to the success of the Lord's church and for us. God will be with us whatever we face. Now, verse 6. God said to Joshua, be strong and courageous, for you will distribute the land I swore to their fathers to give them as an inheritance. This promise had been made from the time of Abraham on till this point where Joshua was getting ready to lead the Israelites into the promised land. 3 times in verses 6, 7, and 9, the Lord commands that Joshua be strong and courageous. Now, how was Joshua going to do that? Well, not by his own strength or his own knowledge, but by what Moses had passed on to him. As Moses' assistant, Joshua had learned from him. He had been a learner all those years. Joshua could be confident because the Lord is competent. He could be dependable because God is dependable. And he could trust because God is trustworthy. Like Moses, Joshua could call upon the decades of experience to strengthen his faith. One example of this is when the Amalekites attacked the Israelites in the desert. Joshua had led that army into battle. And Moses stood on a hill and he held up the staff of the Lord. And as long as he was holding that up, the Israelites were winning. But when he got tired and his hands, his arms, and the rod came down, the Amalekites prevailed. And so Hur and Aaron had Moses sit on a stone, and they held his arms up. And the Israelites were victorious. Did the Lord need that rod raised to guarantee victory? No. But through that, and through many other incidents that the Lord taught Israel, and the battles are not won with human power, but by divine power, by God's power. And that's the way we win battles today. It is with God's power. Verses 7 and 8. Above all, be strong and very courageous to carefully observe the whole instruction my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, so that you will have success wherever you go. This book of instruction must not depart from your mouth. You are to recite it day and night, so that you may carefully observe everything written in it. For then you will prosper and succeed in whatever you do. So we see the conditions there. We have to pay attention to God's Word. The center of Joshua's faith would be God's Word. It would be God's instructions. And God's Word should be the center of our faith. Because when we study God's Word, we can gain knowledge and we can gain wisdom. Wisdom from God. And wisdom and knowledge brings on stronger faith and confidence to be the servants of the Lord. Now you notice the words prosper and succeed there in verse 8. That is not teaching the prosperity gospel, folks. Has nothing to do with that. Success and prosperity come when a person learns and obeys God's will. And that success and that prosperity is mostly spiritual. It may lead to even winning people to the Lord. So, God teaches, He promises, and He provides principles for our spiritual maturity. God is not looking for people with self-confidence. He is looking for people with God confidence that will cause them to be salt and light wherever they go. Verse 9. God continues to speak to Joshua. Haven't I commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God's Word commands that all of God's people be strong and courageous. Do we trust God's promise to be with us wherever we go as we do His will? Do we really trust our God? Folks, it is evident that the majority of us do not. I wonder right now how many people contacted someone, invited them to church this past week. Did you send a card to those inactive members and prospects that's on our outreach prayer list? Did you send a card to a shut-in? Very few visit. And even very few make contact by way of texting, email, phone, or cards. we seem to be satisfied with where we are as individuals and as a church. And because of that, we evidently think that, well, I don't need strength and courage because I'm not doing that. I am very, very concerned about the welfare of this church. I'm concerned about the spiritual health of this church. And what I'm going to tell you next is not a demand by me. It's just some insight that I'm hopeful will help us as a church. I feel that we have 4 options here at this church. First, we can continue to maintain the status quo. That means we just keep things the way they are, do as little as we can possibly get by with, and just watch the church die a slow death. And there are many churches dying. There are many churches like that. Second, we can commit ourselves to become mature spiritually, which will help us become spiritually strong and courageous, and motivate us to go into our community and be the salt and light to those people who do not have Jesus in their lives. Third, we can call another minister, an additional minister, to do what we as a congregation should be doing. And fourth, you can call a younger pastor. Now, there's something to be said about that. Younger pastor would probably be bivocational. So I don't know if you would gain that there or not. And folks, don't get me wrong. Please don't get me wrong this morning. I love you. I love it here. I'd be glad, I am glad to be your pastor. I don't want to quit. But folks, I also do not want this church to die. I want what's best for Pigeon Fork Baptist Church. And if it's going to take someone else to be the pastor of this church, then I'm willing to step aside. I do not want to hurt this church. I want to see it grow. I want us to see us grow spiritually, and I want us to see us grow in number. There's a lot of churches, even a lot of big churches today, they're struggling. And it's, it has to do with COVID. It has to do with churches have their services on the cloud or whatever it is you have back there, Lydia. But this church is to continue. I want you to consider that it needs to commit to number 2 and 3, or number 2 and number 4. No matter who comes, if they don't have the help of the congregation, we will not see growth in this church. I'm begging you to pray that we come to know God's will for this church. I want us to become spiritually stronger and to become encouraged and spiritually courageous so that we can be about the Lord's work in this community.